What I'm going to be talking about is very similar to what I touched on earlier in the keynote, but I want to have some time to open it up for questions on whether it's questions specifically to the curriculum that we're building or just questions in general for Drupal and K-12. So I want to actually open it up and see what questions you have, and maybe I can answer it, or maybe we can get a good discussion going. So as I mentioned before in this pretty scientific graph, there is really a legitimate problem, and these sources from estimates from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So these are legitimate estimates. I mean, they are estimates, but it's believed that there's going to be 5 million unfilled STEM jobs by 2020. And the problem with that is these jobs aren't just web development, of course. These are all facets of science, technology, engineering, and math. But the problem is that it's very much a detriment to our economy and just the job market in general when there's that many jobs that are left unfilled. And it's consistently been going up year over year for the past 10 to 15 years. I really do see this as Drupal's opportunity. It's an opportunity for Drupal to not necessarily solve the problem on its own. It's a little too big just for Drupal, but I think we can seriously make a dent in that big 5 million figure. As you saw in the keynote with Mike Anello's slides with some of the statistics, and I'll have a few in here as well. Drupal jobs are in high demand, which is good for everyone in this room probably. It's good to know that what we're doing is valued and there's a growing amount of jobs available. However, if we cannot fill the rest of those jobs, we're going to be left behind in a lot of ways, and it could be a detriment to Drupal as a whole. If you can't find enough people to do Drupal work, well then maybe people will start trying other technologies besides Drupal. So what is STEM? And STEM's a very big buzzword in education as a whole, especially in the United States. And STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. And the reason that that's important is because a lot of the skills you learn in science, technology, engineering, and math are applicable skills in any type of field, but especially in technology-based fields, which we're all a part of. So being able to actually focus on this type of curriculum, the science, technology, engineering, and math curriculum, is where we can make the biggest dent in, of course, those jobs that we're trying to fill, that big 5 million number. How many here have heard of STEM before? So almost everyone. So everyone's pretty much familiar, for the most part, with what it entails. It's not just science or math classes, it's the computer classes, it's the health science classes, it's all those different types of classes within a high school or even into the career fields. So here's a graph about the growth of STEM job openings. So as I mentioned, there's a bunch of different fields here. It's not just computers, but you do see where the biggest demand is. So that 5 million number, if you do some simple math, over 2.5 million of that is in computer and mathematics type jobs, which Drupal jobs would be a sliver of that larger piece of that pie. So that's why it's important that we continue looking at this, especially the number that Mike Anello said earlier. This is that exact stat. 92% of people surveyed in a recent Drupal Association survey said that they are essentially lacking the Drupal talent they're looking for. They're almost in constant hiring mode or finding Drupal talent that fits specific needs, and it's difficult to do. Stemfuse has looked for some Drupal talent in the past as well, some Drupal positions, and we're currently looking, and it is a little more difficult. That doesn't mean there aren't talented developers out there. They're in this room, they're at this conference, they're there, and some may be even looking for different careers, but there's not enough of them to fill all the jobs that go around. And so what you see is kind of a perpetual benefit for us right now, but as a community as a whole, it's not necessarily beneficial or doesn't enable us to grow in the right ways. So, and you've heard this word a lot today, bridge the gap, and it's kind of just a coincidence that I put it in this slide, but it was mentioned a couple times in the keynote. How do we take this huge demand of 5 million jobs in 2020 and get that to, so Drupal jobs, the talent that's lacking in Drupal, how that can relate, and how we can get people into those Drupal jobs and lower that amount of unfilled STEM jobs that are going to be there in 2020 if we don't do something. So I mentioned who I am. There's a few slides that are similar, so I'm going to brush over those quickly. My name is Shane Thomas. I'm from CodeKarate.com. You may know me best, but I also, my main job, so to speak, is Stemfuse. I'm the Chief Technical Ninja, yes. And you may look at that and say, isn't the whole idea of ninjas and rockstar developers kind of outdated? And I agree it is, but I kind of call the grandfather clause on that. But it was about 5-6 years ago when I first started using that term, so I kind of consider myself grandfathered in. I'm in the cool club, you could say, I guess. But I also previously owned a Drupal website development company. We focused on anything from small mom-and-pop websites to working on websites for the Los Angeles Lakers, American Idol, and some very big brands. So we kind of worked on the entire spectrum of Drupal sites. So we know some of the pitfalls of Drupal, some of the benefits of Drupal. We know how to get Drupal up and running in organizations of all sizes. And as far as Stemfuse, we build STEM curriculum. That's essentially what we do. We have game design courses, mobile app design courses, all different types of technology and STEM-based courses that we build and then distribute and train teachers to teach in high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools. We have a game design course as low as, I believe it's recommended for 4th and 5th grade elementary school levels. And we also have game design courses that are taught into the first years of college in some college institutions. A little bit more about Stemfuse is that we are taught in about 3,000 plus schools right now. This is kind of a little bit outdated map, but it's close, of all the different locations we're at. We're in all 50 states and over 6 countries. And particularly most popular with our game design courses, but all of our other courses are growing in popularity as well. I don't want to spend too much time talking about Stemfuse or even necessarily the curriculum that we're building, although I will touch on that. I want to talk about other ideas for opportunities besides just what we're doing, and maybe we can come together and really think of some ideas to help slowly start to chip away at that 5 million number. That's the big number I'll keep going back to. So how are we trying to help? Well, we are, as I mentioned in the keynote, we are building a Drupal curriculum for high schools. You might be wondering, what does that mean? What does a Drupal curriculum consist of? Well, it's not simply just a training program. It's not a, here's how you build this specific type of site. This is a complete 90-plus hour class that can be taught within a high school, and it has to be teachable by a teacher with limited experience. And that is the hardest part about this entire project or this entire initiative, is that it needs to be able to be taught by a teacher that only has a small amount or limited amount of training. And as you can tell, or as you know with Drupal, that's going to be very difficult. Drupal is complex. There's a lot of problems that you're going to run into while you're building a Drupal site, and not having someone there that can answer even some of the most basic questions is going to be probably the biggest challenge of the entire project. We also want to make sure in this course, this curriculum that we're building, we're offering free teacher training to try to bridge that gap as best we can. It's not going to be a perfect solution, but it is going to be something that we can do by offering that initial training and ongoing support to try to help teachers actually somewhat be able to take this course, mold it into their classroom, and teach it using their own unique teaching style. Every teacher has a little bit different style. We don't want to impose a specific style on the way that the course is taught, and we with all of our other courses and this one included, we want to give them the freedom. So we provide the lesson plans, we'll provide all of the steps that they can go through, but then allow the teacher to make some of those decisions themselves and figure out how can they best, what are they most comfortable with teaching this curriculum. Our goal is, of course, 2,000 schools in 24 months. That's kind of our ambitious goal. We think we can do that after it's released, but that's why we are coming to events like this. We want to get ideas, we want to spread the word, we want to try to figure out creative ways to help schools start teaching this curriculum. Because, as I mentioned in the keynote, Dreamweaver and Front Page are a little outdated for teaching web design skills. It's not as, especially Front Page, which isn't as popular as it used to be, of course. It's very much more limited, but it still exists. But we want to provide a better alternative, and I think with Drupal we can do that. It's not so much that Drupal is the best solution, it's that it is a great solution and it's a great starting point for someone to come in day one and build something that's actually meaningful. The other option with a lot of schools, and this is the way I was taught, was with Notepad and building an HTML site. And I think that that has a lot of value. You can learn a lot from actually doing the HTML and the CSS. But with kids and the engagement that's needed in classrooms to really promote learning, what we've found and what a lot of science supports is it's almost better not to start from the theory and the history and work up, but to start with allowing them to practically do something and then work backwards. So building something with Drupal, in this case, learning how they can actually build a fully functioning and pretty nicely looking website, and then going back and saying, now this is why it works. This is how the browser reads the HTML. This is how the CSS makes the display look like this, versus the other alternative. So that's one of the big key points with what we're trying to promote. As I mentioned before, we were funded with Kickstarter. We had a lot of great sponsors, a lot of great backers, and we've worked with them a little bit and we'll continue to work with them even more going forward to try to figure out the best ways to get this curriculum implemented. Here's that list. As I mentioned before, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. So let's dig into what we are currently thinking this curriculum would best consist of. We want to make sure we still provide some of the base knowledge of how the internet works, because like I mentioned before, this isn't it's not simply a training program. You can't take a high school kid and say, just build this. You also need to show them a little bit, not too much, but a little bit of why the internet works. What is the internet? Because even though it's something that most of them use, they don't understand some of the core technologies that power it. So spending a little time talking and teaching students about that. HTML and CSS skills, some of the foundational stuff. As I mentioned before, we like to show first and then let them hands-on actually build something and then teach them after. This is why it works the way it does. And then the hands-on project-based learning with Drupal, that's a core component. So it's not just a Drupal course, although Drupal is the core technology that's going to be powering the majority of the hands-on stuff within the course. As I mentioned, it's not just a training program. This has to be very rigorous. It has to meet applicable state and national standards. ISTE or ISTE is one of the biggest national standards that we will need to try to meet. There's also 21st century skills standards that we also have to meet. There's also, as I mentioned, you have to be able to allow a teacher to teach it. You have to make it so simple that a teacher can come in with a couple days of training and teach a full semester class. And that is the most daunting task. So who does this help? This is why I think hopefully you're here. How can you either contribute or how can you be affected by this in a positive way? And Doug, if I was drawing on the board, it wouldn't even look as good as that. So that is, thankfully we were able to get this to work. So the students, that's the first and foremost of who is going to be helped by this. Because without the way the students are learning now doesn't set them up for success. I know for a fact when I went through high school classes, which was 10 plus years ago, I was not able to take anything away from my programming classes. I wasn't able to actually apply that outside of the classroom. And I think that is one of the biggest limiting factors on the education system, is it's not applicable. And especially when you want kids to be able to move into these careers, if they don't see how it can be applied, you're going to lose them from the beginning. Especially when you throw them into very complex topics, such as complex programming tasks, where they actually, when their first idea of what a website is HTML code, it's very daunting to a lot of people. So you may have a lot of good, especially designers and those types of individuals, who are lost right away because they see this ugly code and they can't figure out how to make it look pretty. And by allowing Drupal or another applicable platform, but especially Drupal, to show them right away, you can really change not only their education, but their career choices later on. This helps the teachers as well. One of the biggest things that teachers in high schools are running into is they don't necessarily have the training or the skills to teach these computer classes, but they're still thrown into them. A lot of tech education, tech ed teachers have been basically said, you have to either learn to teach computers, especially in small schools, or you're not going to have a job because we're going to have to hire someone to teach computers. Or the computer-based classes, whether it's graphic design, web design, game design, all those different types of classes. And so by offering the free teacher training, we're actually going to be able to hopefully save some jobs that are going to be lost, especially in the small schools and small school districts that wouldn't necessarily have the budget to pay for a teacher to get trained. A lot of times it would be cheaper to hire someone right out of school instead of paying a tech ed teacher to learn those skills. And that's just one example, but there are many others in ways that this can actually help the teachers in their professional development. And this is then, of course, the Drupal community, and I'm sure there's a number of you that might be in this picture. I think this was DrupalCon Portland, if I am right. I'm probably over in the corner there somewhere. So yeah, everyone find yourself if you were there. But it helps. It really does help the Drupal community. I've used the word quantity and quality. The quantity that helps the quantity of the Drupal community by getting more Drupal users. More Drupal users means more popularity. It means more businesses are going to trust using Drupal. It means more educational institutions, more nonprofits, all of those different industries. Some are already very large within the Drupal community, but they can continue to grow and continue to get better with a larger quantity of users. But this also gives us a unique opportunity to promote, I don't want to say the right way, but the Drupal community way within the curriculum. Instead of people or students coming out of college and stumbling upon Drupal, which is a lot of times how it happens, we're actually going to be able to say, hey, there's this community behind it, so you're not just one person out in the middle of nowhere behind your computer. You can actually communicate, you can come to events like this, you can collaborate, and you can learn from the community. So when they leave the classroom, they're going to already have some type of support system that's going to allow them to continue learning. And that is the important part, and that's why I'm so excited about this curriculum and what it can do. It's the community that we have here that's going to help bridge that gap between students getting or losing interest after the class ends and actually being able to do something with what they learn. This helps Drupal companies too, and this is one of the big ones, especially with that talent gap. If you're a Drupal company, you should be scared in 5 years where you're going to be finding your Drupal talent, because at this point it's going to be worse. It's not going to be better. There's a lot of good initiatives like Mike Anello is talking about, and some stuff that Acquia is doing, and a lot of the online training sites that are helping, but we need to do more. And what better way to get more Drupal users, more Drupal contributors, than to start when they're first learning about the web. Their first impressions of building a website if I think back to when I was in high school, my first word processor was Word, right? And that's the default, what I used when I got out of school. I don't use it anymore much, but I'm sure a lot of people still do. But that was what you know, and what you know is typically where you're going to spend your time learning more about. And we can do the same thing with Drupal. If that's the first impression that students are getting, they're going to be more inclined to want to continue learning about Drupal and to take part in the community, especially if the community welcomes these younger individuals with open arms and says, hey, this is a place you can come, you can learn, you can be part of something bigger than yourself. And that, of course, ties into finding that Drupal talent 4 or 5 years after they take that class in high school. And it may not translate one-to-one. There's going to be a lot of kids that take a Drupal class who will never touch it, but if they get asked, how would you build a website? Or, hey, I have a family member who needs to build a website for their business. What are they most likely to recommend? And that's important for everyone, whether you're a web developer at a company to make sure there's constant jobs coming in, or whether you're a company trying to hire these people 4 or 5 years when a small percentage of them decide, because this piqued their interest, they want to be a Drupal website developer, designer, project manager, or any facet within the Drupal community. And I really believe that this helps the education system as a whole. I mentioned this before, but it really is important that we find creative ways to engage students. It's not so much that we just teach them to do something, it's finding creative ways to keep them engaged, because engagement facilitates learning. If we can keep a student engaged, we can keep especially the high risk and lower income that have the highest dropout rates, we can keep them more engaged and we can get them involved and get them on a career track rather than what often happens where they are dropping out of school and not becoming productive members of society. If we can help them by keeping them engaged throughout school, we can start to fill those STEM jobs that are going to be continually getting worse and more openings as it progresses along towards 2020. So it's important. And I think the education system can be benefited from not only this program, but a lot of other programs, and not just specific to Drupal. This is specific to all different types of STEM-related and especially computer science-related type careers and jobs. So as I mentioned before, this is a very similar slide, how you can get involved. If you want to just stay up to date with where we're at, we'll be posting maybe monthly or bi-monthly updates, just short little emails about what we're doing, what ideas we have. Maybe we might need some opinions on what the Drupal community thinks would be the best way. One of the big things we're discussing and we still haven't completely decided on yet is, do we teach this in Drupal 7 or do we teach it in Drupal 8? And it's a really good question, because Drupal 7 is the most supported. It's going to give the students the best chance at getting started quickly, but then again, Drupal 8 is what the entire community is moving towards. We want to be moving towards that. So that's just one of the many questions that we've posed and we're still sorting out, but that's where input is valued, especially from people like yourself. Of course, you can email me if you have any ideas or you just want to chat. Now I want to shift gears and not talk about the curriculum that we're building, but other ideas that maybe you can mention to someone, or maybe you can take initiative on, or maybe you can just keep an eye out for and see if you can volunteer at. Things like after-school programs. There's a lot of high school level after-school programs and computer clubs and things like that where you could bring in a week-long Drupal-type website development training, or just a way for kids to hang out and do something kind of cool after school versus just going home and playing video games. High school camps and trainings, especially summer camps. If you're a company, offering internship opportunities to these high school students. There's a lot of government grants and government aid for offering internship programs. So that's something, if you're a company, explore. Maybe you can get someone who is interested in this kind of stuff, who's a junior or senior in high school, and get them to come in and learn. Maybe you can build a future employee, or at least have some help with a few small projects while you're teaching them about Drupal. there are different ways, and some of this is very new, and it's not really well supported yet, but there's different ways for engineers or developers or designers to actually help teachers that are teaching these classes, whether it's volunteering. There's actually some schools, and I don't know how many, there's not a lot, but there are some schools that will actually allow developers or engineers to go in and help teach a class. And so opportunities like that, these are all small things, but they can help chip away at that big number. And I know it seems like that's too big for us to have an impact on, but it's not. We can actually have an actual significant impact on the number of STEM jobs that are unfilled. I'll mention one other alternative that's been going. This is pretty strong in the Drupal community. I've met a couple people that help promote this, but the Google Summer of Code, which is an opportunity for high school students to contribute back to Drupal. And there's been a lot of, you may have used a module or two that was actually created during Google Summer of Code with using help from a mentor and actually a high school student or high school student team. And so that's just one way that's outside of just curriculum that we can get students involved at a younger age. And then there's the other ideas outside of K-12. K-12, in my mind, is one of the best spots to start because you can get them while they're young and while they're first learning about the web and the technologies that power it. But there's other opportunities. There's the online Drupal training. There's a whole bunch of sites out there, and those are great at getting someone who decides they need this skill started. There's the career training that Mike Anello talked about, and Acquia University is another one that he mentioned. So there's a number of different career training programs where they actually come in, and if you are maybe you're not a developer specifically, but you have an interest, they can train you up and get you actually placed in a job in that field. And then there's actual college level programs, which also don't exist yet. This is another huge opportunity for putting Drupal curriculum into colleges. So when they're learning how to build a website in college, it's not simply here's how you build a PHP website or here's how you build an ASP.NET website. It's, hey, we want to teach you PHP, so let's build this in Drupal, and now let's learn some of the PHP that makes this work. And then going from there. And they can then expand that knowledge to learn more PHP, to learn more object-oriented programming if they're using Drupal 8. There's a whole bunch of opportunities there within the actual colleges when kids are starting to get to a more advanced stage of their development. So let's go ahead and recap. What is the point here? What is this all about? There are, I've said it 100 times already, there's a ton of unfilled STEM-related jobs. A good sliver of that is web development, and a smaller sliver is Drupal. Let's make Drupal bigger and better through the number of users we can get and the number of contributors to Drupal. And let's see if we can slowly chip away at that pie, that chart that says there's going to be 5 million unfilled jobs, especially the computer science type and mathematic type jobs. It's really about bridging the gap. It's about helping a student find out that there's possible careers in website design, website development, project management, any of those skills that we talk about here at Drupal camps and Drupal cons, and getting them interested at a young age and showing them the path, leading the way for them, basically holding their hand and saying, hey, here's an opportunity, take it if you want it, and here's the tool that we're using. It's Drupal. This is how you can use it to become successful in building websites. And that's it. That's all I got. But I do want to spend some time, we have some time for questions or for discussion. And I really want to just hear what everyone thinks, what everyone has to say, really. Does anyone have anything? I'm assuming we want to speak into this microphone so the recording can pick it up.
So, big question, same question I have, or challenges I have in delivering training. How are you dealing with the fact that some schools will be on Mac, some schools will be on PC? That sounds like a whole project of its own.
That's a perfect question. We haven't completely solved that yet. However, we have worked with Acquia with some ideas on using their infrastructure and their setup, so there's not as much installation process on the schools themselves. And so while we still want to have lessons in there on how to install Drupal on your own, those might be lessons that the kid can take home and do on their own computer or try at the school, but it's not going to be a requirement for the class. So being able to use the infrastructure of a service provider like Acquia is going to allow the students to get up and running quickly, and then, as I mentioned before, get up and running, build your first website, and now go back and say, okay, this is Drupal, how do I install it on my own? How do you take this home and install it on your own computer? What are the other options? Let's look at services like Pantheon, or let's look at services like Drupal Gardens, different services that they can use, and then different ways they can set up their own websites on hosting providers as well. So that's kind of our initial plan, is make sure that that's not a hard requirement. It's a lot easier to say you need some type of FTP client versus saying you need to be able to install a local LAMP or WAMP or MAMP stack on a computer.
Another question. This is my last year doing trainings where I'm going to be really doing a whole lot of blocks. I'm going to start moving into panels in my training for next year. I anticipate the need, as you do, for a lot of Drupal 7. We're going to see big projects, I think, next year starting in Drupal 7. Even when Drupal 8 is barely out, as it continues to mature, we're going to see more stuff. So I think 7 has a great future. But I am leaving behind some of the what will be deemed as legacy concepts of Drupal 7, moving more to like the panels type stuff. So are you going to do something similar, perhaps?
That's a great question, and yes, but we're not for sure exactly what that means yet. And that's part of the reason why I'm here.
Neither do I.
So some of what we want to do is we want to make sure when we make the decision, and like I said, we haven't officially made it yet, we have a lot of input from a bunch of different people on whether we should start with 8 or just start with 7. And right now the initial assumption is we're going to start with 7, and then in a year we'll assess and maybe try to update the curriculum to fit Drupal 8. But that is a good point, where if we are going to do 7, maybe it's going to be best to try to take out some of the pieces that are going to be going away or going to be changing significantly, and preparing students for that upgrade or basically that switch from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. Because another thing we want to do is we want to teach them a lot of the core concepts. So if they wanted to go out and build their own site, maybe in Drupal 8, and we teach them Drupal 7 in the classroom, it's going to be enough of the core, this is what Drupal is, that they're going to be able to pick up on the key terms, key concepts, and be able to get up and running relatively quickly. And so I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but it basically sum it up to say we don't exactly know, but we are trying to figure that out. Someone behind you with a question.
So I feel like schools, high schools especially, students get sort of really early into, am I going down a technical path or kind of a college path? And so if this is kind of going to be primarily for technical focused students, how do you deal with that when Drupal is becoming a lot more of an enterprise, big business, we want a degree kind of, system? And one of the things that I've always said is the skills you learn as a web developer can apply anywhere. I work for a large corporation, and I've got people from accounting coming to me asking if I can write them macros because they don't know how to do it, and so
Right.
That's all stuff I picked up hacking Drupal and PHP and 6. So do y'all have any sort of a plan for kind of expanding beyond just, hey, this is a tech prep, you're going to be a generic developer, and more into kind of a corporate?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we want to try to do is make sure they have that practical application. They can go out and apply it outside the classroom, but we also want to make sure we prepare them for more complex programming type classes if they do decide, hey, I don't want to just go and be a web developer. I want to be a systems engineer, or some more of the, I guess, technical type fields where you need a degree. And to some extent, if you're working with enterprises, you may need a degree, but there's no Drupal degree. There are computer science and website development type degrees, but I guess what we really need to do is when we're building this, we need to focus on trying to provide for both those paths, the college type path where they want to still learn a technical skill that can then apply to more of a computer science type degree program, and also then the path where maybe they want to build their own websites and start a small company or work for a small company where you wouldn't necessarily have to have a college degree in order to get in the door. So that's kind of a cop-out answer, I think, because it's saying we want to apply to both, but I think in this case we actually can.
Yeah, and I think that's good. I just, it's always sad to me that students tend to kind of fall into a path and it's hard to change down the road, so it's nice that you kind of see both sides. And just because I have it here, back in 2011 in May, I got an email from the Atlanta Web Design Group, kind of a little cohort of developers, and a group of high school teachers was going to do a web training module for their career people, and they were just emailing developers and just asking, like, what should we teach? We don't know this, and so I'm just glad that you guys are kind of trying to jump in that niche, because I think there's a definite need, and I have an email right here that says, like, we don't know what we're doing, so that's awesome. Thanks so much.
It's good to hear. We got about 5 minutes if there's any more questions.
Just going to build on what you were saying about where this could branch off to. I'm from the University of Tennessee, and there are College of Information Sciences, so those teaching librarians working on their master's degree actually have a Drupal course built in, because a lot of public libraries don't have a lot of money. And so they are actually looking at Drupal and looking at open source as a way to create their catalog systems and their routings for their books and that kind of thing. So something else that I could see maybe thinking about is, as you were saying, it's not just a technical track, but what other careers are out there that potentially this could be applied to, that you could capture some of those kids in high school that are thinking, I might want to go into library science as an example. Maybe you have a multi-tier type of thing. Maybe you have something that truly is going to take you in the technical area, that's going to take you over to the engineering type of side, but maybe you have something that's a little less complex, that just whets that interest and shows them how it could be applied to other careers.
Right, and honestly, what I would like to see happen, my grand vision in 5 years would be to have almost like an introductory to Drupal type course, but then you could feed into you might have a website development where you focus more on development, more on design, and more on the using Drupal or site building aspects of Drupal. And you could allow students to decide what they're most interested in, and then you could then teach them or show them what careers these things could apply to. And that's a great point, though, that you mentioned, because a lot of what we think of as Drupal users are people who do enough with the front end to know how to work things, how to add content, how to manage content, maybe how to structure content a little bit, but that's all they're going to ever need. And they're not going to ever need to build a custom module or to design a theme. And so I think that's a great idea, and something we could definitely try to focus on, is that it's not just designers, developers, Drupal project managers. You may want to just have these basic web skills that you can learn, and we'll touch on those, and maybe a little more advanced than they would need for a job, but then they could take those and be applied to other careers where they're actually just using the web technologies versus actually building. It's a great point. All right. Well, thank you all for your time, and have a good rest of Drupal Camp Atlanta.